Good evening, everyone. Though our participants are joining with us with these difficulties of current weather condition, but we hope to commence our session now onwards. We are go- Today's session is based on our third session, including the Growing Together webinar series, which is organized by the Department of Information Systems and Sciences of Faculty of Computing, NSBM Green University. Yesterday was a memorable day for all of us at NSBM University as we celebrated our remarkable 5 years milestone with glories of 5 successful years and bright future ahead. NSBM Green University's aim is to provide fully fledged, employable graduates for all industry domains to become expertise in their disciplines. Along with that vision, our mind here, we organize this a digital journey accessible by everyone session on web accessibility and inclusive design celebrating the Global Diversity Awareness Month. To discuss this interesting topic today, we have invited Ms. Nadani Sahabandhu, who has more than 10 years of working experience in information technology domain with leading companies Vertisa, Millennium IT, and currently she is working as regional lead and senior manager at client services Mitra Innovation and serving at Slascom as an executive committee member in Product and Platform Council. Ms. Nadini, we are so happy to have you here. Today's session will follow in two parts, including first 15 minutes for the presentation and next 10 to 15 minutes for the questioning and answering session. No more waiting. Let's start this interesting and informative session. Over to you, madam.
Thank you very much. Good evening to all of you. I hope everyone's doing well and had a great day so far. So just like it was said before, the session today is to celebrate the month of the Global Diversity Awareness Month, which is this month, October. And as part of that, I thought it would be good to share with you, what diversity means. And in diversity, there are so many different facets. When you talk about diversity, we usually relate to races, different races, genders, ethnicities, likewise. So, there's a little bit more to it, though. Even though these are the more prominent topics that we talk about in relation to diversity, there's also the aspect of people with disabilities or people with either permanent disabilities or situational sort of impairments or temporary disabilities, likewise. So what we are going to talk about today is that aspect of disability, plus how if you design your systems in a way that it's accessible by people with disability, how it actually ends up catering to everyone, not just people with disability, but catering to everyone. So that's the gist of what we are going to be talking about today. And I would like to keep this session very interactive. So I would appreciate if you guys, if you have any questions, please do either send it across on chat or keep it towards the end so that you can ask yourself. There's also a few questions along the way that I would want your responses on. So I hope you would participate as well in those. Okay, let me start sharing my screen to get started. Okay. I hope my screen is visible.
Yes, madam.
Okay, perfect. Right. So what we're going to talk about is how we can create a digital journey that's accessible by everyone, not just a specific group of people, but how do we cater to everyone who's going to be accessing our platforms, our systems, likewise. And how we're going to be attempting that is with web accessibility and inclusive design. So this is more of a 101 sort of a session on web accessibility. And yeah, let me quickly go into first about what diversity and inclusion is about. So we talked about, diversity being basically, there are multiple different groups of people with different interests, different mindsets, different capabilities. Likewise, diversity and inclusion is about giving value to every human being, regardless of the differences. So with that in mind, I want to take you to a little bit of statistics around the differences that we have around the globe. If you look at people with disability, there are around 15% of the global population who lives with some form of a disability. This accounts to about 1 billion people. So that's a huge number of people. If you don't think about the needs of this group of people when you're designing your system, you're disregarding a lot of your target market. So that's about more permanent sort of disabilities, right? So what we talked about is 15% being a global percentage, but if you look at some countries, this percentage tends to be a lot more depending on which country it is. So just to take an example, in US, there's 26% of adults who have some form of a disability. So that's again more than 1/4 of adults, right? So what I'm trying to say here is the significance of figuring out who your target user base is when you're developing something. And if you leave this part out, the level of impact it would have on the systems that you're going to develop, whether it's going to be, whether people are going to be using the systems that you develop, whether it's going to be completely a flop if it doesn't, when you launch a product, if it's not being taken up by people that you're expecting to take it up, then your product is going to fail, your platform is going to fail. So just something to think about from a more permanent disability perspective. Another angle of this is more than 30% of us, when we, by the time that we retire, more than 30% of us will have some form of a disability. This can come in multiple different ways as well, right? It could be, in the form of visual impairments, hearing impairments. There can be, in terms of getting about, it might be difficult. So there are multiple different aspects, even for people who have not had any form of impairment before. By the time they reach retirement, this possibility becomes a lot higher, right? Before we get into too much of detail, I want you to look at these three circles and type out. So this is what I was talking about when I said I want you to be engaging in this session. I want you to type out what you see in these three circles. The first circle over here, the second one, and the third one. Please do drop it in the chat. I want to first go into the chat and see what your responses are like. Okay, I stopped sharing so I can see what you guys are typing. I hope that was enough time for you to understand what it was. Okay, right, so we've got K, 10, Hi, are you able to hear me? Hello.
Yes, madam, we are you.
Okay. I actually lost power just now, so I'm working without power at the moment. I hope it's audible. If there is any disturbance, just let me know. All right, so I'm going to go back to sharing the screen. So most of you were right. So, what you have over here is a K, a 10. This can be a horse or a unicorn. So it all depends on how good our eyesight is, right? The contrast here is a little less. So it's difficult for us to understand most of the time what what is actually shown in these circles. Majority of the sessions that I have done before, there is a lot of difficulty understanding what is in the first circle, the K, because of the contrast is less. Then there was also a little bit of difficulty trying to figure out there on the third circle as well. 10 was fairly easier for most people. So, the point that I'm trying to make here is that when you're presenting something, when you're designing something, designing your systems, you need to be a little aware of how these differences in the way that you design your systems is going to impact your users. So if it's someone who is a little elderly, how are they going to be able to read that, or do you need a bit more contrast? So this is one of those examples of the visual impairments that might be there in your target market. There might be people with color blindness. There might be different other conditions like ADHD, dyslexia, multiple different conditions which are actually quite common nowadays that we don't know much about. So that's another thing for you to think about as we move along. So I want you once again to answer, this is a quick poll about what you think web accessibility is about. Is it about designing websites for people with disabilities? We call them PWDs. Is it for designing for people without any disabilities or impairments, or is it for everyone? I think that's a very easy question. You can use the reactions on Zoom to answer. I'm gonna stop sharing again so that I can see what your responses are. All right, we've got 1 or 2 responding. What about the others? There's a bit of thundering over here. I hope it's not too disturbing. All right, so we've got quite a few of you responding with a heart over there. So yes, it is, web accessibility is about designing systems for everyone, right? We'll go back to the slides. So what I'm going to be talking through today is we're going to touch upon what web accessibility is all about. Then we are going to go into why it's important, what's the significance of it. We'll also go into a few real world examples and quick wins. So, there are a lot of tools and add-ons and stuff out there that you can use in your projects. So we'll go a little bit into those and also give you a couple of steps on how to get started, a couple of pointers on how to get started on this to make sure that your systems, your digital journeys are going to be accessible by everyone, and you'll be developing something inclusive, an inclusive digital environment, we call it. Okay, so the first area is, what is web accessibility? What exactly is it? So web accessibility is about making the web simple and usable for everyone across devices. The picture over here will give you an idea. We're not just developing for people who are, who don't have any sort of impairments, or like, people we engage with on a day-to-day basis. but we need to be considering the capabilities, it can be functional capabilities, intellectual. So we need to consider what capabilities each of these different user groups that you're building your systems for have, and design your systems in a way that it's going to be easy for people and easy enough and simple enough for people to understand and use on a continuous basis. And also, we all of us use so many different devices nowadays. Sometimes it's the phone, sometimes it's the tabs, PCs, laptops. Even those, we have different brands, different browsers that we use on those. So you need to be a little concerned or considerate about what your target markets are going to be using, and cater your systems according to that. So web accessibility, the web is something that's there for everyone, right? Most of the time, majority of the systems that we would be building would have at least one page that's accessible globally, at least for them to understand what your product is about. It can be protected by access controls and all that. But what we're trying to do with web accessibility is to provide equal access and equal opportunity for people who have diverse abilities. In a nutshell, this is about social inclusion on a digital platform. So we should be supporting, like we said, the people with disabilities, PWDs, elderly people, people from rural areas, developing countries. We talked about the first two, but the second, but the last two that you see here, rural areas, developing countries, how that comes into play is think about, the areas that you live in. How is your bandwidth, and how is your signals when it comes to the network that you're using to access internet? Is it always really great, or is it choppy? Is your line dropping from time to time? So you need to be considering these kind of things when you're developing your system, so that even if they don't have a great bandwidth, even if they don't speak the language, the main language, even if they don't speak English or they don't use English, are they going to be able to interpret or translate what you've got? Does your system support the translations, the language support? Does it give enough tips for people to intuitively figure out what your features are? How they need to be using your system. Likewise, so one example, I'm sure most of you would have used PicMe. PicMe is an application that's going to be used by majority of people across the board, right? So it can be people, people who are very young, people who might be around in their 20s to 50s, 30s, likewise, or even people who are elderly, above 60s. It's a basic kind of, it has become a basic service that's out there that a lot of people use, a diverse groups of people use. So they need to make sure that it's very easily understood. It doesn't take much to understand how the system works. So they frequent notifications, understanding, or rather explaining to you how the system works, how the features work. So there are multiple different ways of creating this environment of social inclusion on a digital platform, right? The examples that I've given so far from a visual angle, as well as the ease of use, are things that are more easier to understand, but we will get into a little bit more detail about how this web accessibility comes into play in different countries, different settings, likewise. So what you see over here, when it comes to web accessibility, or for that matter, anything that we develop needs to be measured to for us to understand whether it's performing well or not, right? So web accessibility also is measured against something that is called Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. This was first published in 1998. It started off mostly as supporting people with disabilities. So if you remember, the one of the first questions I asked was, who is this web accessibility for? Is it for people with disability? Is it for people without disabilities, or for everyone? The reason for asking that is there is a myth or a misunderstanding rather that web accessibility is still just for people with disabilities. It's not. It has expanded and extended quite a bit. The subject area has extended quite a bit to make sure that it's not just about people with disability and catering to their needs, but about multiple diverse groups who are, who's just like you and me on a day-to-day, people that we meet on a day-to-day basis, people who interact with systems on a day-to-day basis, anybody for that matter, right? So from when it was initially published in 1998, even though the focus was narrow, they then extended it, published a new version in 2008, and that is what is expected more as compliance requirements. So when I say compliance requirements, majority of the countries have now put out regulations saying web content accessibility is something that they have to be adhering by law. If they don't adhere to these guidelines, a certain level of these guidelines, they can also be fined. So when I say they, this tends to be mostly focused or mostly forced on government organizations, because government related services are being accessed and used by diverse groups of people. So majority of the governments are enforcing these web content accessibility guidelines to be a compliance requirement in the systems that are being developed. So this has now become a world recognized guideline, a set of guidelines that's world recognized. And also, I'll get into the details of it, but has also become a basic human right. So in terms of compliance, WCAG 2.0 has majority of the accepted compliance requirements today. There were a couple of new versions that came through. So 2.1, 2.2. 2.2 is planned for 2021. I don't think it's released yet. 2.1 was published in December 2018. This extended to not just the web, but also the mobile applications that are being developed. And from there, they're also looking at extending this further into all sorts of digital media. So, PDFs, any other digital sort of medium you might be developing your systems on, WCAG 3.0 would be catering to or focusing on all sorts of digital media. That's the direction that they've given. But this is not something that's published yet. They're expecting to be publishing this in a couple of years. So what do these web content accessibility guidelines entail? These guidelines are driven by 4 key principles. So those 4 key principles is what you see over here. You can remember this with the mnemonic POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. We will get into a bit more detail on this later, but just have the mnemonics in your mind for us to get into that a little later. Okay? So now we'll get into why is web accessibility important. If you look back at 2018, it was only less than 10% of websites which were meeting web accessibility standards in 2018. So that wasn't too long ago, right? But over the last year, especially with the pandemic, a lot of people, not just tech savvy people, but a lot of people, like, your parents at home might have gotten or become more tech savvy, or would have started becoming more tech savvy because of necessity, out of necessity. When all of us were in lockdown, there was no way to get your groceries delivered, right? And parents, or a majority of people who weren't even using websites or any sort of digital media before, were forced to be using some sort of digital media, using phones a bit more so that they can send the grocery list over to the supermarket or the grocery store and get everything delivered. So, over the last year, this spike in people becoming more tech savvy and spike in digital transformation was a major difference in this cycle of digital journeys for enterprises and small and medium companies alike. If you think about that, and I was telling you about web content accessibility guidelines. This was those guidelines were published by W3C, World Wide Web Consortium. Their goal is to lead the web to its full potential in a way that it's accessible and enabling people with disabilities to participate equally on the web. So it's not just people without disabilities or impairments, but they want everyone to be able to equally participate and equally access these resources that's on the web. So that's their goal. And that's what these guidelines are also hoping to achieve. It's sort of like a framework that enables inclusivity. So we talked about how it can be inclusive. We will get into a little bit more detail about it in the next couple of slides. The other side of it is we also talk about web accessibility creating better user experience. User experience is also a major topic these days, mainly because majority of people are now getting online, accessing resources online, accessing, the basic way people are trying to find out more information about what's happening around the world. So, those kind of changes that have happened over the last year has created a bigger significance on good user experience. And web accessibility guidelines also support better user experience. The other side of it is compliance, like we talked about. Majority of countries are coming up with their own regulations, tying up to these web content accessibility guidelines, in enforcing entities that serve bigger groups of people, diverse groups of people, and basically enforcing these entities to comply with creating a more socially inclusive digital environment for people. So when we design a system for people with disability, they are not just designing for permanent disabilities, like, for someone without a hand, without an arm. But when we are designing with them in mind, we are also catering to temporary disabilities and situational disabilities. When we say temporary disabilities, so you see the example on the screen. A permanent disability is someone without an arm. A temporary disability is someone who might have, met with an accident and have a broken hand. A situational disability is, in that moment, because of some activity, they're not able to use their hand. Likewise, so for example, you go to the grocery store, you have a bunch of grocery bags in your hand, and only one hand is free. Are you able to use your phone? You wanted to maybe make a call, or you wanted to get an Uber or a Pick Me? Are you able to use that app with just one hand? So those are the kind of things that you need to, that you're actually designing. When you're designing for a permanent disability, you're also catering to temporary and situational disabilities. The next one shows different aspects of these permanent, temporary, and situational impairments. So, I hope, this will help you understand it a little bit better. We were talking about touch, about sight, about hearing, about speaking. So these are, examples of the disability continuum from permanent to temporary to situational. I'll take the second example over here. A permanent disability would be, catering to someone who is blind. A temporary disability might be cataract, which can be corrected with a surgery. A situational disability or an impairment might be a distracted driver. So, that's the continuum of disabilities or impairments that you're designing for when you have permanent disabilities in mind. So we were talking about compliance requirements and web content accessibility guidelines becoming a basic human right. So these web content accessibility guidelines are also considered ISO 40500. This is basically because of the significance of web content or web accessibility rather, it has become an ISO standard and also basic human right, as the United Nations would quote it. So taking this into account, different countries have their own regulations, own guidelines as to how different entities will need to be adhering with these guidelines. So US, there's something called Section 508, Americans with Disabilities Act. It's famously known as ADA. Europe has its own as well, and then Australia has its own. Just to give you a little example of how disabilities are regarded as a major concern for some countries. In Australia, there's, I think, about quite a big number of people with disabilities, which means that the country has to spend a lot on taking care of these people with disabilities, right? Because they need a lot more care than, for their therapy, for their treatments, for different things, they would be needing a little more financial help financial help to support their lifestyle, right? Which is a cost to the government. So they came up with a strategy to enable people with disabilities to be more self-sufficient, to be more socially inclusive, and even to be contributing to the economy. So when I say contributing to the economy, what this scheme or strategy helps them to do is they have a funding mechanism, an insurance scheme, which helps people with disability to live the life they want. So when I say live the life they want, just like you and I, they might also have certain aspirations in life. There are some people. There's a client of mine who had cerebral palsy. So that's a motor disability, like muscle related disability. So their muscles were not functioning as normal. So there were certain issues in getting about, in having a proper balance. What his parents were told when he was born was that he's going to be bedridden and he's not going to be able to do anything basically, and the family would need to take care of him throughout his life, which might also be short. But his parents didn't want to accept that. What they did was, from the time he was really small, they got him to train, they got him to do like little exercises, got him moving a lot and, using his muscles a lot so that he would develop the capability in a way that later in life he would be able to take care of himself in a day and age where the parents are not there, the family is not there to help him. He would be self-sufficient. He would be able to take care of his own needs. And guess what? This client I was telling you about, he was, he was working for an IT company. He was a developer. He was able to, drive a car with a little bit of modification, drive his own car. He trains on a day-to-day basis, meaning he goes to gym on a day-to-day basis to make sure, he drives a bicycle. So he was like, when he was born, what his parents were told was that he is not gonna be able to move at all. But look at what enabled him to be taking care of himself on his own without any support from anyone else. He's living on his own as well and travels on his own, all that. So these kind of strategies are basically a part of a bigger government strategy, but that also boils down to what it means on a digital medium. So, again, tying back to web content accessibility guidelines, Australia says that all the government institutes need to be complying with the AA level of web content accessibility guidelines. We will go into what this AA level means in a little bit. Before we get into too much of details, let's look at a couple of real world examples. So you see here the two different examples that I've given in the same content, but different color schemes. Over here, it's a little difficult to sometimes, understand, depending on how your eyesight is. The contrast level over here is less. So it's, as soon as you see it, what goes into your mind might be more the color, not so much the content, the textual content. Whereas over here, because the contrast is much higher, you're able to quickly figure out what each of these are and read through what the text means. So you need to be a little aware of what your target market, your user groups are like, what their capabilities are. Just one example over here from a visual perspective. Another example I want to show you, what I'll do is I'll go into the website. So what you see over here, this little gadget. So this is Userbay. Userbay has their own add-on that can be integrated into your websites. When you click on this little man over there, you get multiple features, multiple boxes with different features. So I'm going to show you the visual aspect. Contrast. When you click on contrast, it gives you, first one inverts the colors. The second one gives you a more darker contrast. Then goes into a lighter contrast. And it desaturates the colors.
I hope you have not shared the screen.
Oh, okay, sorry. Oh, right, let me see. I might have to stop sharing and share again, I think.
Yeah, I think you have to do the new share.
Yeah, okay. Let me try that again. Is that visible?
Yeah, now we can see it.
Okay. So sorry, let me do that part again. So on Userbay, you go to userbay.org. You get this little button at the top. Click on that. So there are multiple different features over here. I'm not going to go to the screen reader because you probably won't be able to hear it. But trial it out. I'll go to the contrast. So you invert colors. The first one lets you invert colors. The second one shows you a darker contrast. The third one shows you a lighter contrast. The fourth one desaturates the colors. So these are catering to different types of visual impairments that are there, from color blindness to ADHD to dyslexia to multiple different conditions that are out there that we might not even know about. So this company has researched a lot about the different types of disabilities that are there and have catered to those specific disabilities. Another example I want to give, I'm going to take out the contrast. When I click on this highlight link, the highlight links, it shows you exactly what the links are. So basically, what areas can you click through so that you can explore a bit more on your website, right? So throughout, it shows all these links that are there. Then for, for someone who needs a little bit, need to zoom in a little bit, it also has an add-on for making the text bigger. Then there's, another one for increasing the spacing. So these cater to multiple types of different disabilities. So likewise, so you see here dyslexia friendly. So there's also an impact on the types of fonts that you use. Depending on the fonts, it might have an impact on your users. So there are different kind of areas that you need to be mindful of when you're designing your system. And having an add-on like this that already has done the research for you is going to be really helpful, because these are, they've spent millions of dollars trying to understand the users' behaviors, users' conditions, their pain points, likewise. So this is a really good add-on that you could use in projects that's out there. They have free trials that you can try out as well. This is used a lot by the big names. You see, different big, very well-known names over here as well. So do trial it out. I want to show you this as well. So, okay, the cursor, a little big cursor. So it helps to focus your attention when you're reading through what the content on the website. Some people might need a little bit more support. So you have a mask, a reading mask that helps to focus the attention. Then there is, let me see. There's another one, the reading guide, another type of a guide that helps to read through the content, focus your attention through the content. So likewise, there are a lot of different features within Userbay that you can use on your systems, which you don't have to develop from scratch. You can just, just similar to how you use Google Analytics, do the tracking. Similar to that, you can use an add-on like this, and make it more accessible almost instantly. Well, after probably a couple of hours maybe, but yeah, it's much easier than doing from scratch, right? Okay, so that's one. I'm going to stop sharing and go back to the slides. All right, so back to the slides. I thought I'll keep this over here just as a reminder. A diverse mix of voices leads to better discussions, decisions, and outcomes for everyone. So when you're designing your systems, try to engage your potential users, try to engage different types of, say, perceptions from people. Don't stick to just one or two people within your group. Always try to understand, try to show what you're going to be building. Maybe it can be a prototype, it can be a developed system, whichever it may be. It's always good to get the viewpoints of diverse groups, a diverse mix of voices, so that you understand what their perceptions are. Because end of the day, who's going to be using your systems, that's basically going to be other people, right? So it's always a good practice to make sure that your systems, your applications have a better chance of performing better. Early on, you might have heard about fail fast mechanism. So you fail fast and learn faster and adapt based on your needs. So try to engage different types of people, different groups of people with different backgrounds, different genders, different cultural backgrounds, ethnicities, likewise, to make sure that your system is catering to the needs of your potential users. So let's get into how to get started. So we talked about web accessibility guidelines, the 4 principles, the 4 key principles. Web accessibility guidelines are actually broken down into 3 levels. The 4 principles that we talked about, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust, those 4 are broken down into 13 guidelines. So the 13 guidelines are further broken down into success criteria, which we categorize as level A, level AA, and level AAA. We will get into what each of those mean as well. But first, to shed a little light on what the 4 principles are about. So perceivable is information and user interface components must be presentable to users in a way that they can perceive. How, like, basically what you're trying to do with engaging your potential users beforehand is also that what sort of, if you develop a prototype before a visual sort of maybe it can be a throwaway prototype even, if you engage users from beforehand itself, you will be able to understand their perceptions. It can be with a simple thing like a color, or it can be about how you have placed certain components on your application. How easy is it to access certain key features that's on your application. Likewise, the second one is operable. User interface components and navigation must be operable. So a basic way to check that would be to see if the entire application, the components are like whether those components can be navigated through just by using the keyboard without using a mouse or a touchpad or anything of that sort. So a good practice, I think that's one of the basic requirements for level A as well, to be able to navigate through the application just using a keyboard. So likewise, those are the kind of success criteria that would fall under operable. Understandable is information and the operation and user interface must be understandable. How quickly can people understand it? Is it do they have to spend a bit more time to figure out what it is? If they are to be spending time, are they likely to be spending time on your system? Or are they just going to drop out because it's not easily understandable? So those are kind of things that you need to think through. Robust is content must be robust enough that it can be interpreted reliably by a wide variety of user agents, including assistive technologies. As you might know already, people with disability would tend to be using different types of input devices or assistive technologies. So, that compatibility, depending on your target market again, compatibility with the devices that they would be using, it can be even, different, say, browsers or different mobile devices or laptops likewise. So it can be basically looking at what compatibility are you trying to provide for your users. And then we get into the 3 different levels. The compliance level A is basically the must-have, the basic level, the most basic level of compliance in the web accessibility guidelines. AA is more, should have. So those are usually AA falls under like the compliance requirements for certain entities. And depending on the target market, it can differ. These are more desired level, depending on those target market. Like I said, AAA would be more good to have. It's good to have, but it's not really essential for you to have. There might be like a small percentage of users who need compliance with, or compatibility rather, with assistive technologies. Are you able to cater to them? You always have to think about the value that you're going to bring to your users versus the cost that it's going to incur for you. So depending on the return on investment that you're expecting for from your platform, you can decide which level to comply with. So this is just another view of how the different levels would be catering to multiple different types of disabilities. I won't go too much into detail of this, but you're free to take a screenshot if you want on this. And yeah, from that on, so that's about the first step of learning about what web content accessibility guidelines are. There's a lot of resources out there you can learn on your own. The second step would be, it can be, you might be trying to make your existing website compatible or web accessible, or a completely new website or an application that you're building to be compatible. So the easiest or the most cost-friendly way would be for you to go through, that web content accessibility guidelines, which is quite detailed enough for you to understand, even at a very technical level. You can do a preliminary check on your own. So things like, whether it's able to navigate, whether you're able to navigate through the entire system just with the keyboard. Are there like flashing content? Are there, traps where if you access certain components, you're not able to exit from that or navigate through to other components. So those kind of things you can always check. Even things like color contrast. Those are things that you can check on your own. There are also automated tools like WebAIM, Wave. So these are just two tools that's out there you can use for free. WebAIM is mostly for color contrast checking. And there's a fully fledged web accessibility evaluation tool called Wave. So these are tools that you can use, automated tools that you can use for your systems without any cost. But there are like, costly sort of tools that's out there as well. So if you're in a more commercial sort of setting, you might get exposed to multiple different tools of that sort, especially anyone who's interested in quality assurance, quality engineering. These are areas that you might come across in future. The other angle is, once you do your initial check, the preliminary check, use the automated tools, if you want further support, you can always engage an expert. Most of the bigger companies tend to do that. There are companies who are built on just web content accessibility alone, where they do audits on how well you're complying with the different levels of web content accessibility guidelines and the regulations that's out there in different countries. So it can even get to that level, but of course they would cost you a lot more. So that's basically wrapping up the session on web content accessibility guidelines and creating a digitally inclusive environment in your digital journeys. So just a thought that I want to leave you with, everyone should have access to information. And as people who are creating platforms and products that's used by a lot of different, diverse groups of people, it's our responsibility to ensure that these people also have a very inclusive environment and they have better access to information, access to resources, and that it's easily usable by these different groups of people. So that's the thought I want to leave you with. If you have any questions, please do, send me the questions, or you can even speak it out. Are there any questions as of now? did you understand what we did so far? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see what's there. Okay. Any questions, or did everyone at least understand anything that I said? Is that a yes, no response?
Yeah, everyone can ask any question through our chat or can use the raise hand option to unmute yourself and raise your question, because this is a very informative session and our speaker is ready to answer each and every your questions.
All right, Kevin has said yes. I think we've got a question, right? So Chana, when considering on each and every rules, discipline, strategies before doing system designing, and if the customer's requirement is urgent and spending too much time on researching design, will it cause to lose of customer base? So, okay, so when you say customer, do you mean the customer as in the business or your end consumers or end users? Can you clarify that for me? Chana, I'm wondering whether that's okay, end users, right? So, it's always a gamble, right? When we do research, we can spend years and years doing research, but it might not really meet the time to market, right? So it's always a gamble of when we want to be launching something, when we want to be validating what our product needs, like basically the launch version of the product, or basically trying to figure out what's that optimum return on investment would be when you're developing a system. So when you're researching, you can't, you don't have the luxury of spending too much on these activities also. So there are, quick ways of doing research activities, meaning you can do surveys, you can do you can pick say 4 to 5 people who's going to be potentially using your system, and do a focus group with them or individual sessions with them. We've done that with a lot of people with disability, and that's how in my previous projects, that's how we've realized the way that we were designing the system, it wasn't going to work out at all when we launched it. So because we did that initial research, it helped us to launch the system in a way that is compelling for users, right? So it's what I would suggest is when you're developing something, we call these, I don't know if y'all have heard of these concept of minimum products. There's a minimum viable product, minimum marketable product, minimum lovable product. So there are different types depending on your strategy of launching a product. How quickly do you want to be validating it? How urgent is it to be putting it out to the market versus just validating the concept of it? Or how urgent is it to put it out in a way that the customers will fall in love with the product and create a buzz around it? If you take a product like Apple, they always try to create a huge buzz about it, right? So that people themselves will also do the marketing for that brand, right? And it's a strategy that you're trying to employ with your roadmap, your product roadmap, or your platform roadmap. So it's always a gamble. Yes, there is a chance that if you wait for too long, that you might lose your customer base because the competitors are not going to wait for you. Your competitors are going to be, trying to launch before you as much as possible and grab a bigger market base. But yeah, it's depending on what your strategy is, what your objectives are, that you'll have to do a little bit of a gamble there. I hope that answered your question, Chandler. Got another one, Dimali. how can we ensure the quality and productivity of the developed website for end users? So I think there are multiple ways of ensuring quality and productivity. If it's a commercial setting or I think I'll probably take a more project-based setting in an environment like Yola, in a student environment mostly, right? When you're developing a system, let's say you're developing it for your university, your college, you're trying to, there's always a purpose behind what you're building, what you're trying to, the objectives that you're trying to achieve. Is it about grabbing more number of users, or is it about converting converting to sales? So some products might be actually integrated with payment gateways and all that. So you want to be enticing them to be purchasing products. So there are different objectives that you would be developing for. So depending on your objectives, your quality, your productivity, your those measurements or matrices will also differ. Your usually in a commercial, in a industry setting, what we do is we have a quality framework that we would always adhere to. So this quality framework would entail not just things like accessibility, but performance, data protection side of things, the infrastructure aspect, how quickly is your website page going to launch or rather load. So there are so many different matrices that we would always have before we start a project most of the time, that we agree with the customers to say, these are the quality matrices that we are going to adhere with, right? So accessibility always comes as one of those matrices that we align with. So we would tell to the customer, we are going to be complying with level A of web content accessibility guidelines, or we would say it's going to be AA because you're going to be catering to a lot of, you're a government entity and you're going to be catering to a lot of diverse groups. So it's that agreement that we have at the very beginning, which would decide the quality that we are going to be complying with. And it's my advice is always, when you're developing something, have those objectives of matrices in mind, what you're trying to achieve end of the day. And let that lead you as to how far you go down the path of certain features. Like you can go in depth of some feature that's not going to be used by your target market. So you have to, again, commercial settings are always a gamble, regardless of what you're going to be developing. It's always going to be a gamble. It's always going to be quick iterations of different versions of your system. So yeah, I think that's my answer for your question, Dimali. I hope that gave you some sort of an idea. Any other questions, or are we good to go?
Madam, I think Hashan has raised his hand to ask a question.
Yeah. Hello. I have a question. It's think I have a startup, and I'm delivering products. So where can I I have no idea about the quality matrices. So where are some resources that I can refer to to learn about these quality matrices and all of this information.
All right. So usually the quality matrices would have, there's a lot of resources out there. My best resource is always anything that I don't know, I would always go to YouTube and just Google. Some things for you to check out would be, a big part of the quality matrices lie on things like non-functional requirements. Most of the time, when we're developing a system, we would always look at the functional aspect of things, but we tend to miss out a lot on the non-functional requirements. So when I say non-functional requirements, it's those things like performance, reliability, compatibility, accessibility. There are a lot of different, say, aspects of non-functional requirements that we need to consider in terms of adhering with quality. So it can be about quality standards of code, like the code quality. It can be about the final, say, quality of the features that you're giving to your users. It can be about how many concurrent users you're going to be able to handle on your platform. So there are multiple aspects of that sort. What I could do, Hashan, is maybe send you a couple of links that would help you to read up. And I guess we could go from there. Is that a possibility? Maybe I can share a couple of links.
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. How do I get through? Should I send it to your organizer?
Yeah. Shall I connect with you in LinkedIn? If
Yes,
that's okay.
that's perfect. Yeah, that's okay.
Coming to LinkedIn, I have also another question. It's not really related to this subject aspect of it. But I just went through your LinkedIn, and you have worked in several organizations. What I noticed was, most of you worked for a short period of time in some organizations at your start. So do you think, starting off, is it all right to, switch like that? Does it affect you, learning, as since you're starting off, you're learning and you need to get the experience. So if I may ask, why did you have a reason to change, or, was it because you didn't feel like you didn't gain or the side of the knowledge that you really wanted to?
Okay, good, very good question, Hashan. I think that's a question that I always get asked as well. When I was initially getting into the industry, so during university days, I used to be a very techie person, meaning, that has gone away completely now. But back in university, I used to be really fond of developing systems. I used to do a lot of certifications. So there were a lot of things of that sort. And when I was getting out of university, I felt I wanted more broader sort of exposure, not just in developing a system per se, being a programmer, but a broader sense of exposure from a IT industry. So when I went into my internship, that was on IT procurement, an area that we usually wouldn't get into, right? So from IT procurement, 6 months of internship, I completed that and then got into consultancy with Ernst & Young. So it was very contradictory, but it gave me a bigger picture of how organizations build up their strategies. So we did things like strategy and IT strategy for Department of Census. I also got exposure into IT auditing. So things like access controls, general controls, some things we haven't even heard of. But that was a really good learning area for me to understand a broader picture of what happens in the industry. So then I thought I need to, I made it a point for myself to get exposure within the first couple of years in multiple different areas. So from there, I went into MIT for business analysis. And from there, I went into marketing. I was also following marketing at the time, CIM at the time. So it all depends on what you want to achieve in your career, right? My perspective was, okay, I've been developing systems. Yes, it's not at a commercial level, but I've been doing that, and now I want to get exposure in something a little different. I wasn't someone who wanted to be sitting at one place. I wanted to interact with people. I wanted to experience different things. So that's my choice in terms of gaining a broader experience in my career. And it actually helped me quite a bit. So the question that you asked, is it a problem? When I went for interviews, yes, I did get asked, why have you been switching careers from time to time? So when I told them, this is my expectation, they they listened to it. They tried to give me what I wanted as well. So it was always in my mind, either a year or a little less, that I would want to get exposure and then figure out what I want to do next. So within, say, 4 to 5 years, I would figure out what area I want to stick into. And then I think after that, after moving to Virtusa, within the company itself, I got opportunities because of the previous exposure mostly. So, again, I would emphasize that it depends on what you want to do with your careers. So, if you think that that's the kind of way that you want to go, and you show potential, I'm sure that's not going to be a problem. In fact, it has helped me in my career. It has really helped me to get that different exposure. So yeah, I hope that helped you.
Thank you.
Thank you, madam, for answering our every questions, and I hope everyone got the necessary answers for that. So now I think the feedback form was shared in our chat, and from that chat, furthermore questions you can ask, and our team will go through on them. So all your thoughts will be a great motivation for us for arranging next sessions. So today we had a very informative session, and I think all of you got a good knowledge. And thank you very much, Ms. Nadini, for sharing your knowledge with us. It was a great one. So, and also I would like to thank you all the participants who joined with our session today. And thank you very much for our organizing committee to organizing this kind of good informative session with us successfully. And let's meet at our next webinar, which will be conducted under another interesting topic in next week. So hope we can conclude our session on this point. Thank you very much for everyone, and stay safe. Good night.